At the Ottoman Empire, continuing on with our discussion of Islamic gunpowder empires. So the Ottoman Empire, I know this is not at all foreign to you. We've talked about it from the European history context, so we know many things about it. It is notable among the gunpowder empires because it was the largest. Definitely in terms of geography. This is a map of the Ottoman Empire at its height. So we see that it expanded well into Mesopotamia, along the West Bank here. It extended into Northern Africa, Egypt, and it even pushed into Eastern Europe, conquering Hungary and pushing at the gates of Vienna at its height in the mid-1500s, rather. It was founded originally by the Osman family. So you see that the Osmans lived on the Anatolian Peninsula here, but originally they occupied just a little tiny bit of land. The Asia Minor, or the Anatolian Peninsula, before the rise of the Ottoman Empire, was quite diverse. You can see that there are a number of different people that are occupying this territory. So the Ottoman Empire is very much a tale of conquest and centralization of power. Again, like I just said earlier, the Ottoman Empire lasts the longest. It doesn't actually decline until the beginning of the end of World War II, rather, when it's defeated by the Allies. So this means that the Ottoman Empire in total lasted over 600 years. This is just one single dynasty lasting that long. The first ruler of the Ottoman Empire that you should know was Mehmed II. He had the nickname Mehmed the Conqueror. One of the major military achievements that Mehmed made was that he besieged Constantinople. And as we know, Constantinople used to be the capital of the Byzantine Empire. It was a city that had been unsacked since the 1200s during the Crusades. The city itself had a triple fortification. It was a walled city. It had, again, like I said, it only was captured once in 900 years of its existence, and this was during the Crusades in the 1200s. And the capture of Constantinople would not have been possible without the Ottoman use of gunpowder. So because they were using cannons, they were finally able to break down the walls of Constantinople and conquer it in 1453. As you know, they renamed the capital at this point to Istanbul, and they started to convert it to a Muslim city. The location of Istanbul is key because of its ideal trading spot. It's located here on the Bosphorus Strait, which is a narrow waterway that connects actually the Aegean Sea, so the Mediterranean eventually out over here, and then of course the Black Sea. So it's really sort of a bridge in terms of a water connection between the East and West. It eventually is going to expand even further. So Istanbul is actually going to be a city that occupies both sides of the Bosporus Strait. And one of the things that happens during Mehmed's reign is he starts to construct some very mighty structures that represent the power of the growing Ottoman Empire and also the growing influence of Islam over the region. One of the things that began construction during his rule was the Topkapi Palace, which you see down here. This was the royal residence of the sultans for over 400 years. The construction began during his reign. I believe that it ended after he left power, however. And then another thing that he did was he sort of Islamified the city that used to be the center of Christendom. And so this image up here is the Hagia Sophia, which was a famous church during the Byzantine Empire. And it was converted to become a mosque. And so here you actually see these four towers. These are minarets, which is where the Muslim call to prayer takes place, right? And so basically you start to see the transformation, and just blanked on the word, of this mainly Christian city to basically the center of Islam eventually when the Ottoman Empire reaches its height. So the capital, actually, hold on just another second on this slide. So yeah, the Hagia Sophia, I think I already mentioned that. One other thing about the Topkapi Palace was it was also a location for, official state government occasions as well as royal entertainments. And so we very much see that by building this major royal residence, this represents a major centralization of government. And remember that map that I showed you of the Anatolian Peninsula here before the founding of the Ottoman Empire was largely decentralized. So that's one of the major accomplishments of the Ottomans, is they basically take all these sort of multi-ethnic, diverse places and they consolidate them under one ruler. Mehmed did not only get the name the Conqueror from grabbing and seizing Constantinople, however, he continued his pattern of conquest both to the south and west. And so on this map here, we see in purple represents all the things that were acquired for the Ottomans under Mehmed's rule. So you see on the one hand, he is starting to push farther west. Actually, the Ottomans fought against Venice many times. They were sort of a trade rival. Of course, we know that the Italian Renaissance was kicking off as the Ottoman Empire was coming to power. So they strengthened their navy and attacked various parts of Italy during this era. The Ottomans actually never did conquer Venice, but they did exert enough control over them that they forced them to pay an annual tribute. So that does show you that at the very least, the Ottomans had some pretty heavy influence over this area. And in addition, they had some southern acquisitions that continue after Mehmed's reign. So we see that they're starting to push a little bit farther to the east here, and then Selim the First, who was the ruler after Mehmed, actually continues to expand down through present-day Syria, Israel, and then they start to push south into Egypt, and eventually you're going to see that they also gain Algeria, and then they fill in the gap here under Suleiman's reign and occupy basically all of northern Africa. So one of the reasons why the Ottomans were able to expand south at this time was because the dynasty that was ruling Egypt at that point, it was called the Mamluk Sultanate. This is going to decline. And the Mamluk Sultanate, prior to the rise of the Ottoman Empire, was basically like the center of Islam. This is going to change. And so now you sort of see a more northern and western shift of the center of Islam, which is clearly going to be seen as a threat to the Europeans, particularly after the Protestant Reformation. Mehmed, of course, since he was known as the Conqueror, had a very effective military system. The system called Devshirme was a military selective system, a little bit beyond a draft though. Devshirme means a blood tax. And so what that meant, they started this early at the beginning of the Ottoman Empire in the 14th century, and the system expanded considerably throughout the 15th and 16th centuries as the Ottoman Empire grew in territory. So the Devshirme was where the Ottomans basically took Christian boys who were the subjects of empires that had been conquered by the Ottomans, and they forced them to serve in the Ottoman government and military. So this was boys ages 8 to 20. Again, they were taken each year from conquered Christian lands. A lot of them were coming from lands in Europe, like the Balkan regions. These Christian boys then converted to Islam, and they were taught various skills in politics, arts, and the military. The most famous group of boys that were converted under the Devshirme system was a group called the Janissaries. And the Janissaries were a military group. They basically formed the elite forces in the Ottoman army. And the Janissaries, we're going to see, represent a very good example of upward mobility. Even though the Janissaries were technically slaves to the Ottoman Empire, since they made up since the military was so significant, they sort of became one of the highest classes in a sense. And so actually you're going to see that parents, people who lived in Christian conquered areas actually encouraged their sons to become Janissaries because they knew that they would have a very good life there and they would be pretty high up on the social hierarchy. Other Christian boys who are not Janissaries, some of them are going to start to be recruited to work for the government. Some of them are going to be scribes, tax collectors, and some of them even act as diplomats. So Mehmed is very significant in the sense that he starts to contribute more land to the territory, and he also effectively organizes the military, which is going to help when Suleiman becomes really the next major leader of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so Suleiman really represents the peak of the Ottoman Empire. His nickname is Suleiman the Magnificent, and it was under Suleiman's reign that the Ottoman Empire actually pushes well into Europe. In 1526, the Ottoman armies overran Hungary, and 3 years later, in 1529, they were at the gates of Vienna. They tried to take Vienna. They sieged it. They tried to siege it twice, but they do not succeed. The Vienna forces effectively ward off the Ottomans. But because the Ottomans went so far into Christian Europe, they were seen as a huge threat to the West. It's one of the reasons that really prompts the age of exploration in Western Europe, because they no longer feel like they can safely rely on land trade routes. So notice that these years are corresponding with really the influx of all the explorers in this period, like the Spanish and Portuguese. There's no coincidence there whatsoever. In 1522, Suleiman's navy captures the island of Rhodes, which we can see here. Rhodes was part of Greece. So again, we're seeing the Ottomans have greater influence over Europe. Rhodes also was a stronghold of Christian knights before it was conquered by the Ottomans, so it's another good example of a Muslim area sort of taking over an important area for Christendom. And then in the 1550s, the Ottomans are pushing even farther south and west. So the Ottoman Navy takes control of Tripoli, which was in northern Africa. And one of the ways that Suleiman, as well as the rest of the Ottoman Empire, tried to increasingly exert their influence over the areas that they conquered was they constructed mosques throughout them. And they also constructed great military forts and other major buildings in the cities that were under his control. So a good example of that, here's another major mosque in Istanbul called the Suleimani Mosque. This actually has a really prime time location, in Istanbul. It actually looks out over the Golden Horn Promontory, so it's basically like the main inlet of the Bosporus Strait that juts out into the Black Sea. Another really important contribution of Suleiman was that he reformed the empire's legal system, and he's given the nickname the Lawgiver. So essentially there's a more fair legal code that exists under Suleiman's rule, which makes him quite popular. The Ottoman Empire also had a very, very strong economy during Suleiman's rule. One of the major reasons why that was because of all the conquests. The empire expands very significantly in size. As we can see here, all this stuff in stripes is the Ottoman Empire. And we can see all these arrows are representing the various areas that the Ottomans have trade contacts with. And so again, just because they're located right in this major water connection between the East and the West, and they also have connections to the Asian Silk Road, the Ottomans essentially are trading with all powers of Eurasia and North Africa, right? So what we're going to see is that European styles and furnishings are going to start to become popular in the Ottoman Empire, but they're also still very interested in Eastern luxuries like silk and spices. The Ottomans also developed their own major artisan class so that they can trade their own goods with faraway markets. Some of the most significant craft items that were produced by the Ottomans were tiles, and you can see an example of tile work here. You also have rugs, and we sort of think of them as Persian rugs, but the Ottoman rugs here, and also pottery. So another thing that's significant about the Ottoman trade networks, since they had access to North Africa, and then by the Trans-Saharan trade network, West Africa, the Ottomans do develop their own slave trade, and additionally they get more access to gold because of their connections with West Africa. And another thing that helps them develop their trade network is that there are Ottoman traders that sort of serve as middlemen for the Ottoman Navy. So basically they handle goods that are coming from both directions, and these middlemen sort of receive profit in exchange. And so we're going to see a development of a stronger merchant class once the Ottoman Empire expands. One of the ways that the Ottomans maintain such a strong military to protect all their major acquisitions and also to protect the major waterways as well as the overland silk roads is that they levy a tax on the peasants, and this helps finance the military. So legal officials and tax collectors over time are going to become corrupt because of this system. So essentially tax collectors were meant to and take a small sum of the taxes that they collected in the form of their salary. But basically, as time goes on, these tax collectors are going to skim more and more money from the taxes that they collect in their areas. So in the early stages, the Ottoman bureaucracy was more efficient and loyal. As time goes on, when the sultans become weaker, they're not. We're going to see that agricultural villages become increasingly burdened because of these taxes. So that basically they're responsible for helping with the upkeep of the military, of the bureaucracy, and we're going to see that because of the burdens of taxes, this will eventually contribute to the decline of the empire. The Ottoman Empire was very notable for its religious tolerance. We're going to see that this is a major contrast from the Safavid Empire, which was just to the east. One of the major benefits of religious tolerance was that trade was able to flourish. The sultans allowed both Christian and Jewish merchants to live in the Ottoman Empire and act as middlemen in the trade networks between East and West. The only stipulation was that these non-Muslim people who lived in the Ottoman Empire had to pay an extra tax. But we know that this was sort of characteristic of some of the earlier Persian empires, and it worked quite well. So that's a very good example of continuity, is that the Ottomans know that having religious diversity is very helpful in an economic sense. And just this image is actually Mehmed the Conqueror with Gennadius II, who was an ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople in 1444. So right after Constantinople was conquered, even though he converts Istanbul to a Muslim city, he still receives Christian representatives, which is very significant. So the people that used to be Christian that live in these areas still have a relatively safe and positive life. As you know, as I mentioned Janissaries before, that's an excellent example of Christians who were able to become quite successful in a Muslim empire. So Ottomans, they're actually going to sign some trade networks with other countries, notably in Western Europe. The Ottomans actually signed a significant trade agreement with France to try to open up commerce between these two powers. So you can kind of see that they want to have a positive economic relationship with Western Europe. But what we're going to see is that the terms of the agreements with France actually eventually diminish the Ottoman profits in the long run. So, we know obviously as time goes on, the Ottomans and the Europeans are going to become more antagonistic towards one another. So there's an initial effort to have a positive trade relationship that eventually is going to wane. Some of this is also because of religious tension. And this is just an image of Suleiman the Magnificent here and King Francis I of France over here. The Ottoman coffee houses make up a really important cultural development in the Ottoman Empire, as well as articulating one of the most significant locations of business in the Ottoman Empire. So coffee houses were a location where many business agreements were signed. You saw that also this was a good location for cultural events such as poetry recitations and scholarly debates. And so you could sort of see the coffee houses as sort of a non-Western equivalent of like the salons during the Enlightenment era in Paris, or this is certainly sort of a representation of how important cultural development was for the Ottoman Empire, as well as economic development. Coffee houses hosted trade meetings with representatives of faraway places. They oftentimes would help ease some of the trade restrictions from other faraway countries. So, for example, one of the major exporters of coffee during this time period was Yemen. And if European traders wanted to buy coffee directly from Yemen, they had to actually pay a little bit more for it. So the Ottoman Empire actually acted as middlemen between the Yemen coffee traders and European buyers. And actually, it benefited the Europeans because they could purchase coffee through the Ottomans at a cheaper rate. One of the things that happens as the Ottoman Empire develops, though, is that the coffee houses were seen as a little bit of a threat to the centrality and the strength of the centralized power in the Ottoman Empire. So there are going to be periods during the Ottoman Empire where the coffee houses were forbidden, but there's so much public pressure to keep them open that a lot of times they actually do continue to proliferate. Okay, another thing that shows us how significant the Ottoman Empire is and how global it is that they're opening up significant trade networks, not just with other parts of Europe and Asia and Africa, but as the age of exploration starts to unveil other parts, the New World, so to speak, we're going to see that they also have access with the Ottoman Empire. So once Europe starts to interact with the Americas, you will see that goods from that far away will make their way to the Ottoman Empire. Many of them are going to be sold for cash. So we're going to see the influx of things like dates, nuts, well, actually the other way around. Some of the typical agricultural products that were produced in the Ottoman Empire, like dates, nuts, and olive oil, eventually are going to be replaced by American products like cotton and tobacco. Tobacco actually at one point is going to be prohibited in the Ottoman Empire, but again, just like the coffee houses, because it was so popular, there's going to be pressure to make the consumption of tobacco acceptable again. The social classes in the Ottoman Empire, you're going to see that this really shows how important the military is to the empire in general. The most important class was a warrior aristocracy. We see also as the Ottoman Empire grows that the military class actually becomes more significant than the previously existing bureaucracy. So the warrior aristocracy is eventually going to compete directly with the bureaucracy. Those people were called the scholars and experts in Islamic law. They were called the ulama. Eventually, even though they were specifically trained to work for the government, the people who are recruited from those Christian areas through the Dev Sherm are actually going to start to work to have positions in the bureaucracy. As we already discussed, in the military, the Janissaries are going to become very powerful and prestigious. And this is going to challenge the sultans in some periods. There's going to be some attempts to mount coups against the sultans because the Janissaries gain so much power. But that's not that surprising. There's going to be tension between the military elite and absolute rulers in all of the Islamic gunpowder empires, so not particularly surprising. And as the sultans become less effective and capable, you're going to see also that another position is going to become more important, and that's going to be the royal viziers. They act as advisors to the sultans, but eventually they're going to occupy really influential positions in the government. They speak on behalf of the sultan, so as the sultan becomes more corrupt over time, the viziers essentially have a little bit more oversight and influence in the government. And another thing that we discussed before, but it's worth re-mentioning, is that women, as time goes on, are going to gain an increasingly important role in Ottoman politics. They play important social and political roles in courts. Wives and concubines of the sultans often try to promote their own children to be the next heirs of the throne. So this is an example of harem politics, which will become even more significant as sultans become more corrupt. And also eunuchs have a prominent role in the harem. They oftentimes act to protect the women that live in the harem, and so we see basically eventually as the sultans wane in power, women and eunuchs are gonna really take advantage of that situation. There is not a huge merchant and artisan class in the Ottoman Empire, although of course as it expands and its trade develops, we will have the formation of a small middle class in the Ottoman Empire, but still largely the most important groups were the military, and even though they don't have high social status, the peasants will be significant just to act as bread baskets for the rest of the empire. So the peasants existed below the middle class. They were quite poor. They were burdened with most of the taxes that helped support the Ottoman armies. And then you do also have slaves in the Ottoman Empire. Obviously, they made up the lowest part of the totem pole, so they were below the peasants. Many of the slaves came from outside of the Ottoman Empire. A lot of them, they were prisoners of war from Central and Eastern Europe, so places like the Ukraine. And then other European slaves are going to be captured on the seas by Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean, and then they're going to be sold to the Sultan or other high-ranking officials. And one other way that people were essentially enslaved by the Ottoman Empire was the system of what was called impressment. So this is an image of a person being impressed. To be impressed means that you were forced into military service in the Navy. So this is another form of slavery that existed in the Ottoman Empire, but European countries often also practiced impressment well into the 19th century. Estimates say that about 1 million people were impressed into the Ottoman Navy between the 16th and 19th centuries. So again, pretty evident proof that there was a really significant military role of the Ottomans in how they gained power and how they maintained power. So that's really significant. Again, we mentioned this earlier, but let me just elaborate briefly. The Ottoman Empire was very religiously tolerant. which is a major reason why the economy was successful. Notably, after the Spanish Reconquista in 1492, the Ottoman Empire actually welcomed Jews who were exiled from Spain to move into the Ottoman Empire, notably Istanbul. Mehmed particularly invited Jews to settle in Istanbul, so we'll have a pretty significant Jewish community expand in the Ottoman Empire at the end of the 15th century. Some members of the Jewish community could elevate themselves in status. They were able to serve as physicians and even diplomats. So we see that, you know, the Ottoman Empire was okay with having outsiders work for the government. You also had people from outside areas contribute significantly to the literary community. Historians speculate that people who came from Europe actually brought the printing press to the Ottoman Empire, so that's a significant contribution to technology and communication. But one thing that we should acknowledge is that the Jews in particular were not fully assimilated into Ottoman society. Oftentimes they were still only permitted to live in specific areas of the city, so there was some ghettoization that took place. But what's significant is that they still, Jews as well as Christians, were allowed to worship in the Ottoman Empire. And they could live with pretty limited restrictions, even though they could only live in certain places. Other than that, they could sort of have any kind of job that they wanted. The only stipulation was that they had to pay a tax that was required of all non-Muslims to live in the empire. But still, the most elite classes of the Ottoman Empire were still Muslim. Okay, so that's important to realize. That there was some upward mobility for non-Muslim people in the Ottoman Empire, but it was limited. So the Ottoman Empire, even though it does continue into the 19th century, it reaches its peak around 1566 and then does get smaller thereafter. In 1571, the Battle of Lepanto, it was a conflict between the Ottomans and the Spaniards and the Venetians. The Spaniards and Venetians defeat the Ottomans in this battle. And then also after Suleiman dies, the subsequent sultans were much weaker than he was. And we're also going to see that European countries start to grow stronger at the Ottomans' expense. And so eventually the Europeans are going to be able to reabsorb a lot of the areas that they lost to the Ottomans at their height. So places like Hungary are going to regain autonomy. And then also as we move forward, we're going to see that the Ottomans are going to lose some of their possessions in northern Africa. And of course, once we get closer to World War I, they're going to lose their Balkan possessions. So that really signifies the end of the Ottoman Empire. Once we get closer to the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire is going to have the nickname the sick man of Europe because it's continuously shrinking. And another thing that we already discussed, but worth me re-mentioning it, is that the Ottoman Empire also gets weaker because of weak sultans combined with harem politics and eunuch politics. So they're going to become much more powerful behind the scenes and make the sultan weaker. And also, as time goes on, the Ottomans are going to be less religiously tolerant, a little bit more insular in nature, so this is going to hurt their economy. They're sort of behind in terms of abolishing slavery as well. Slavery actually continued until the very end of the Ottoman Empire in the 20th century. So let's talk briefly before we close up this video about continuity and change in the Ottoman Empire. There are some really important continuities in the area from the Christian time up until the end of the Ottoman Empire. So still in terms of the economic significance of the center of the Ottoman Empire, it's the same as it was when it was the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so Istanbul is still the western end of the Silk Roads, and it's sort of the eastern end of European trade, right? The Grand Bazaar that existed in Istanbul was still a source of many foreign imports like amber, wood from Russia, spices and silk from China, ivory and slaves from Africa, carpets from Persia. The demand for goods that passed through Istanbul created an export market to all these other cities of the empire. So the economic location and significance of Istanbul was the same as it was in the Byzantine Empire. We're also going to see that Istanbul is going to remain a really important center of arts and learning, just like Byzantium was when it was Christian. Poets and scholars from across Asia are going to meet in coffee houses and gardens, and they're going to really create a rich intellectual atmosphere. They are exposed to Western schools of thought, so the scholars that meet in these coffee houses are well versed in the works of Aristotle and other Greek writers, and they're also interested in works of Arabic writers. So this shows us very much that there's sort of a convergence of Eastern and Western thought and that very much thrives in the coffee houses that were so prominent in the Ottoman Empire, despite the fact that they were banned by the government. This isn't surprising if you think about it. You know, these were sort of intellectual hubs that could certainly challenge the legitimacy of the Sultan. So it shows us that despite the militancy of the Ottoman government, there was certainly a rich class that developed that was just interested in new ways of thinking and interested in enriching themselves. And so the cultural contributions, to a certain extent, exist outside of the government itself. And what else? Another continuity is just that it is still a really rich location of art and architecture. The sultans of the Ottoman Empire are very interested in continuing to beautify the cities. Of course, they do make them Muslim in nature, but they also are restoring some of the most glorious buildings that existed since the times of Constantinople. So essentially the continuation of arts and literature is certainly present. The changes, one of the most important changes, as you've probably guessed, is the religion. Of course, this area goes from being a Christian stronghold to a Muslim one. You're also going to see that during the Byzantine Empire, remember that one of the most famous Byzantine emperors was Justinian, who established the Justinian Code. You're going to see that the legal system is going to change, and the leaders are going to adopt Sharia policies instead. Remember that Sharia law is a system of Islamic law that deals with all aspects of life: criminal justice, marital laws, inheritance, alcohol consumption, what you can eat. So that's really significant that we see that that's going to change, right? Sharia law is going to be adopted in the Ottoman Empire. So that is a summary of the Ottoman Empire, and we will pick up on the next video on the Safavids, so stay tuned for that one. Thank you.